For the purpose of this assignment, today's presentation will be delivered to a Brisbane Chamber of Commerce meeting to increase awareness of people with disabilities and their participation in the community. My name is Melissa Mikkelsen. I've worked with many of you on community projects and have been invited to talk about if we should be doing more to support people with disability in our community. Now, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, in our city alone, it's estimated that 210,000 residents have a physical or intellectual disability. Within this number, it includes people with significant hearing loss, substantial visual loss, intellectual impairment, mental illness, and other debilitating conditions such as arthritis. In short, there are visible disabilities and there are invisible disabilities. Often people within the community are more likely to treat a person with a visible disability different to somebody with an invisible disability. A prime example of this are the new libraries across Brisbane that have had many refurbishments to improve accessibility for people with disabilities. The reality is the accessibility hasn't improved for all people with disabilities. Rather, it's improved for people with physical disabilities, not invisible disabilities such as intellectual impairment. The libraries have created accessibility improvements with wheelchair accessible computer desks, Wi-Fi benches, electronic upgrades to book borrowing and returns and shelving according to the National Disability Standards. It has a hearing loop for people with hearing impairment and automatic doors. According to the current website, the library doesn't seem to have created any features for people with intellectual impairment to independently borrow books or information on what to do if technology fails when people with intellectual impairment are trying to borrow books. This means we could be doing more and we could better support people with intellectual impairment in our community to use our businesses and services. So how do we do this? The answer is we need to think about how we communicate. As intellectual impairment is often an invisible disability, it often isn't clear that somebody has an intellectual impairment until you communicate with them or notice that they have difficulty communicating or completing tasks independently. It is likely that the person with intellectual impairment may have a family member or a paid carer as a companion person. They even may have an assistance dog with them. Should you suspect someone has an intellectual impairment, it is important to communicate with a normal tone of voice, talk to the person with a disability, and be flexible with your words. If the person with intellectual impairment seems confused, it is better to change your wording than continually repeat the same words over and over again. It is important to offer assistance to people if they seem like they need your help, but if they decline, respect that person's wishes. If you do communicate with a person you suspect may have an intellectual impairment, don't raise your voice or talk to them as though they were a child. It's also important not to ignore them if you suspect that they have an intellectual impairment by only talking to their carer. It's important to think about how we can support a person with intellectual impairment to communicate as independently as possible. One way this can be achieved is using symbols called PECs. This stands for Picture Exchange Communication. These symbols could be used in menus or grocery stores to help mark with text, to help mark the aisles and items in the menus. Using these symbols in menus might involve the person with an intellectual impairment bringing the menu to the service counter and pointing out the items that they'd like to order. PEC symbols can currently be seen in communities at all ability playgrounds to help facilitate children with speech-language delay and intellectual impairment with their communication. However, PECs aren't used at the moment in the wider community to help facilitate adults with speech-language delay or intellectual impairment. We have some speech therapists here tonight who are more than happy to chat with anyone who's interested in incorporating PECs communication systems into their business to help our community better support people with intellectual impairment. Next week, we'll be talking about the benefits of partnering with disability employment services. But now, I'd like to introduce you to the speech therapists who are here tonight, Diana, Chloe, and Jason. And I'd like to invite all of you to direct any questions you might have about tonight's talk to myself or one of our speech therapists. We can arrange through community funding for one of us to come and visit your business and provide support to include ideas to further facilitate communication and support people with intellectual impairment to access our community. Please raise your hand if you have any questions. Thank you.